Deconverted Man here. So Bill and Melinda Gates have this letter out asking people to say something about health and raise awareness of how we can decrease children dying younger ages, and they've done this last year and they're doing it again, and so big YouTubers have been asked to participate in some way. Now I'm not big enough to get noticed, but I thought I would throw in my humble 2 cents for what they're worth, and hopefully do something useful with this. So of course my thing is Informal Logic, which is a subset of philosophy. And so in the philosophical realm, I definitely do think that there is a way for us to change how we look at certain things in order to change the way that we think, and then that will enable us to provide help more effectively and more often. So go back to, say, the Enlightenment, and here I have this kind of picture in my head of where we said, okay, these Bibles and these holy texts that tell us everything about everything, they're interesting, but maybe they're not that useful to figuring out how things really work. So let's just set those aside, and let's just look at how things really work. And so we did, and we discovered a lot of things, and this is science, right? And you say, well, there's a lot of religious people that did that. Yeah, but let me continue here before you interrupt. My point is, by leaving aside something, whether that something is valuable or not, it enabled us to do great things. And so I think that with philosophy, you may have heard Dawkins and other prominent scientists express a very big disinterest in philosophy, even saying philosophy is dead. And this annoys people that like philosophy. But science is ultimately relying on philosophy. How dare you, say no to it? How dare you say it's dead? We need it. Well, I don't know. But I think that in many ways, setting this aside might lead to, again, a new sort of enlightenment. And one thought that I had that was a specific thought regarding this is going to the moral argument. And you might have heard somebody like, say, Matt Dillahunty make the case that, yes, morals are subjective, but we can make them objective. We just have to decide what they're going to be based on. So let's base them on harm. And so doing harm is bad, not doing harm is good, and then you have this framework of ethics, and you have a thing that you can quantify, and then you have a workable ethical system and a workable morality based on this objective principle. And then the apologist or the philosopher says, but what is harm? And it's just like, really? Come on. You know what harm is. We know what harm is. Do we really have to get into this? The natural language problem is something that logic just kind of shrugs its shoulder at and says, yeah, natural language, that's a thing. And so what is natural language? Well, what we're experiencing right now as I talk, this is natural language. Every word I use is understood by you to an extent where we could both explain that word and we'd have very similar results to each other. This is just, now some words are more nuanced than others, some words have different contexts, but we understand them, and we can even quantify and show that we understand them and we share a common understanding. But if you want it to be objective, then you have to get a little bit picky, and you have to get specific, and you have to aim it and say, well, what is harm? Do you mean causing pain. Well, sometimes, yes, but there's other sorts of harm that can be done. So with the hypodermic needle, of course, here's a very small pain that is a necessary pain in order to deliver some sort of medication or to test blood or what have you. Well, what if we had a device that could do the same thing, but it was way more expensive, but it didn't hurt at all? And it was not invasive at all. It didn't puncture my skin. It didn't go into my blood vessels, and so the risk of any sort of disease entering my body through this very small needle is none, because however it delivers the medicine is in a non-invasive way. So it doesn't, it doesn't do what the hypodermic needle does in that sense, but it performs the same function. But it's way more expensive. Well, that expense is a harm. It's a harm that my wallet or my insurance company or the state or the hospital, somebody has to absorb that harm to the money, because the money is required to fund that device, that technology that prevents this other harm that's far less and is safe enough. The danger of it being unsafe is extraordinarily minuscule as long as we take the right precautions, etc. So if we had these two things, we would say, well, it doesn't make sense to use this other technology yet. We have to reduce the cost to being at least equal to the hypodermic needle, if not less than the hypodermic needle, because it doesn't make sense to use it otherwise. Or maybe it only makes sense in extraordinary situations. So that word harm doesn't necessarily have to be as concretely defined as some would try to make it out to be. And I'll make my case for that. The heap of sand paradox, I think, illustrates the problem of natural language. What is a heap of sand? And so the paradox has you imagine removing one grain of sand at a time from the heap, and eventually there's no heap. But removing one sand didn't destroy the heap, so you never can stop having a heap by removing one piece of sand, but yet you do eventually run out of a heap of sand at some point, and when does that happen? And you can't answer the question because the term heap is nebulous. But we understand it to be a pile of sand, a heap of sand. It's a pile of sand. Well, how big? Is a dune a heap? Is this sandcastle in October now a heap of sand? Well, yes, but also no, because we probably picture it as a small pile of sand. But we understand somewhat intuitively heap of sand. We understand that idea. But I think the word harm is better defined than heap in many ways. And although you can make the case, well, maybe we need it to be really hard to find, I think that a much better case can be made for, let's just set that problem to the side. It may be a good idea to really get that word properly defined, but let's put that issue on the side. And just say we all kind of know what this is, and we're going to go forward and see what happens. And so in this way, that aspect of philosophy is dead to us for now. It's not really dead. We'll revise it later. We'll look at it later. But right now we're going to see what we can do by just moving forward and saying that harm is bad. And what ethics and morals can we now develop that we have said that's going to be the standard that we all follow. All of us, all humanity says, okay, it's going to be don't do harm. That's going to be our ethics moving forward. Imagine what good that could accomplish without having to worry about, well, what does it mean, this word harm? And we have this sort of second enlightenment in morality. And certainly better morals will enable us to prevent everyone from dying. Forget it being aimed at, younger or older people or whatever. It's just, in general, we're going to want to prevent harm. So we're going to look at that and say, okay, here is the things that cause harm, and here are ways to fix that. So I think that although there is a use for informal logic, even when you do leave harm behind in that sense, the philosophy about defining that word into some hard, concrete term is one that we ought to set aside to enable us to move forward with developing better ethics, better morals, so that we will be compelled by those morals to create a better world.